My name is Cody Armstrong, and also on the line with me is Ethan Raito. And Ethan will help with any questions that you have. I'll also stop to answer any questions that you have. With these webinars, we really like to make these as inclusive as we can, as interactive as we can. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions. We have a questions dialogue in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type in anything, and we'll do our best, both Ethan and myself, to stop and answer any questions that you have. So let's get started. Quick comment. If anyone else is having any kind of audio issues, let me know. If you're having any trouble hearing me, let me know. Okay, so I'd like to get started, and the topic, of course, today is creating planes in Onshape, and I want to focus on all the ways that we can construct planes. We can construct planes for use in 3D modeling and building all our various features. So that's really the idea, and I was hoping, forgive me just a moment, I'm trying to turn up the audio, make it a little bit louder. Okay, hopefully that made it a little better. So the goal today is, again, go through all the various construction plane commands, walk you through how to create construction planes, all the various options that we have, and even some custom features that have been written by the Onshape community. So we're going to focus on basically any way that you can create a custom plane in Onshape. So creating planes, it's going to be a short webinar. There's only a few options to show you and a few different examples that I have, so we're not going to take the full hour today. But again, feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this, and we'll do our best to stop and address them. So creating planes in Onshape. Let's jump in. Quick question, can I access this webinar in the future? The answer is yes. We post all of our webinars on the YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, so definitely check out our Onshape YouTube channel and the playlist for our webinars. Okay. All right, so let's dig into this. I think the audio is a bit better. Forgive me if it's not. The agenda today is real simple. If you haven't created any construction planes, if you haven't, gotten into depth modeling where you needed to create construction planes, this is definitely the webinar for you. We want to walk you through all the various examples. I even have just a few best practices, a few tips, and a few examples where some of these plane commands can really make a big difference. So again, the agenda today is just to introduce construction planes and then go over creating construction planes. So I want to go over, why you would need to create them, and then how, of course, and then we're going to go over how to use them. The last thing I want to show you here today is a few custom features that have been used or been created by the Onshape community. Okay? So, all right, so let's dig in. Hello, hello, testing audio one more time. All right, so let's move on. Now, when to create a plane and when not to. And I think this is one of the most important questions as we're going through this is, from a new user perspective, why would I need to create a plane? And I think that's the most common question that we get. And there are really two things to consider when we're talking about creating a plane. Do you have a default plane that will accomplish what you're trying to do? And that's probably one of the first questions that I would ask the user. Do you have a standard plane, a front, top, or right, that will do what you're trying to do? Create a sketch on that plane. And that's one of the first things I'll ask a new user. If you have a default plane that will work, use it. That's the obvious solution. The reason I say that is because the default planes never change. So you don't have a parent-child dependency issue with default planes. And so again, put simply, if a default plane will work, the front, top, or right will work, use it. It's much faster. It's much more resilient to change than if you were to construct planes when one of those will work. So just consider that when you're talking about, do I need to insert a plane? Well, ask yourself, will one of the default planes work? If they will, then use them. They don't change. You'll never have rebuild issues with them. They're not dependent on anything else. And so they're less likely to break with model changes in the future. So that's one of the first things to point out. If the default planes will work, use them. The other thing to consider is any planar face in Onshape can be used as a sketch plane. So any flat face can be used to construct a sketch. And that's the second tip. If you have a planar face, use it. Again, the main logic there is you just don't have a dependency, a plane tied to something else. If a flat face will work, again, it's just as easy to select that flat face and start creating plane or start sketching. So that's the big thing I want to point out. If you have a default plane or if you have a planar face, both of those solutions are faster for getting your geometry created. However, if those two options don't work, you'll need to create a plane, and you'll reach a point where you don't have any reference, any face, any plane to select to start your sketch. You're like, well, what do I do next? And that's what we want to talk about here today. So if either of the first two options do not work, you'll need to create a plane. It becomes necessary to create a plane. And I want to walk you through all the various examples and methods that we have for that. But those are the two, in general, I'd say, not necessarily applying to everyone, but in most cases, those two rules stand. And that is, if the default planes work, use them, or if a planar face works, use it as well. Okay. Is a planar face the side of an object? And it's important to point out a planar face is simply a flat face of a part. Okay? So any flat face of a part is considered a planar face and can be used to construct sketch geometry. Okay? All right, so when to create planes and when not to. Now, the next question, the next thing that often comes up is, well, what are some tips for working with planes? And one of the most common questions I get is, how do I hide the planes? And especially when you start constructing a lot of planes, or maybe you just don't care to see the planes in the graphics, one of the biggest tips I can give those users out there is the P key on your keyboard. The P key will hide all planes or show all planes. And it's a very fast way to, again, hide or show current planes. So just one of the first tips that I have for you, the P key will hide and show planes. Very easy way to show or to get rid of them. The question has come up, not a curved face. No, you cannot construct a sketch on a curved face. And that will be one of those scenarios where you may need to insert a plane to get the sketch geometry you're looking for. So the other thing I like to point out, and this was added, a few updates back now, pre-selections can make the process faster. And I'm going to show you what I mean by this in just a bit, but you can actually select the combination of things that you want and then go to the plane command, and it will know, based on your selections, what type of plane that you want. And it's a very fast workflow. It's definitely something I'd recommend when you start to do a lot of plane insertion, to pre-select the entities and try and save yourself some time. Now, another frequently asked question, and something that comes up often, is, can I resize planes? And what is the length of a plane? Does the plane size in the graphics matter? Yes, planes can be resized, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But it's important to remember that planes are essentially infinite length. Although the graphic of the plane may be a certain size, the plane itself is infinite length, and it doesn't have an impact. A lot of users will see a plane and say, oh, I can't construct outside of that box because that's the plane. That's not true at all. Planes are infinite length, and you can, change the size of the plane, but it's more of a graphic representation. It doesn't really have an impact on the design itself. It's just for your benefit, if you like that look. So planes can be resized, but it's important to point out it's not a requirement. You can have a plane any size that you want and construct any size sketch within that plane. There's no limits. Okay, so those are just a few tips that I have for you. Now I want to jump right into building some planes, and I want to go over the standard plane tools first, and then we're going to get into some of the custom features that have been created with Onshape. So let's jump into it. Now, the first thing I want to do is, of course, walk you through building the simple planes. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, if you have an option, the top, front, or right planes are your best bet. They never change, they never move, and therefore will never have any kind of issues with rebuild. So again, using one of these three planes, if applicable, if it will work, is best. Okay, just keep that in mind. And so again, those planes are sure to be your best option. Okay. Now, what happens if you can't use one of those and I need to insert a plane? How do I go about doing that? And I'm going to start with a simple offset plane. And the question often comes up, I need a plane, but I need it 2 inches in front of the front plane. I need it offset by 2 inches. Maybe I'm constructing a loft, or I just need a gap between the front plane or a face, and the plane I'm trying to construct. And so this is a great example of a simple offset plane. Now, this is probably the most common and easiest plane to insert, and so I'll walk you through it first. The plane feature, very important. In the Part Studio, you'll see the plane command in the far right of the toolbar. Select it, and then you select your entities. Now, as I mentioned before, you can pre-select, and I'll go over that in just a bit, but you can also post-select. So I can say, okay, I want a simple offset plane, and then select the entity that I want to reference. In my case, I want a 2-inch offset off of the front plane. So I select offset, I choose the front plane as the entity to reference, and you'll notice a plane has now been inserted 2 inches off of the front. Okay? This is a very common workflow, again, if you're doing things like lofts or you just need a gap between a face to start your sketch. So a simple offset plane, you can reverse directions, of course. You'll see if I hit reverse direction, it flips it to the other side. So you have the ability to control which direction it's going. But other than that, it's, again, a very simple example. I can set an offset value. Let's set it to 4, for example, and you'll see that plane shift, and now it's 4 inches away from the front plane. Once you hit the green check, now you have a plane in your feature list. And it's an important thing to point out, all the planes are features in your feature list. They're editable just like normal sketches and features and so on. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Question that's come up, you said there's no issue with rebuild if I use the default planes. What is rebuild? In CAD modeling, when you rebuild a model, you're essentially making a change and then forcing the model to regenerate based on that change. Okay. Now, the question again comes up, what about some of the other various plane options? I do want to point out in this example, I'm using the front plane as a reference, but I could use a lot of different things as a reference. So if I jump into another part here, this is a part that's already been modeled. And if I do a plane, choose offset, I can click on any of the planar faces. Any of the flat faces in this part can be used as a reference. So it's not just default planes that you can use. Any planar face can also be used as a simple reference for your offset plane. Right? So here I'm inserting a plane 1 inch from the face that I've selected in this part. Okay? So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be a default plane. It can be a standard face, flat face of a part as well. The question, if I draw something on a plane that I made, is it possible to change the drawing of a plane as SolidWorks? Change the draw of a plane as SolidWorks. You can change the reference of the sketches on to a different plane. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding the question. You can change the reference to the plane. You can edit the plane later, and it will rebuild accordingly. So I believe the answer is yes, assuming I'm understanding the question correctly. All right, so that's a simple offset. Again, all it does is it takes a standard plane or a planar face, any flat face, and it gives you a plane offset away from that given the distance that you've specified. Very simple. Again, one of the most common and basic examples of a construction plane. Now, the next one I want to get into is the plane point. And we're going to jump into, I have a bike frame example with a number of different good techniques for building models. But the one I want to point out here is, in this example, the plane point. And like the name implies, it allows you to take a plane and any point from the model, and it will insert a plane parallel to the reference that you've selected at the point you selected. So let me give you an example. Here I have the right plane, and the right plane is right in the middle of this bike frame. So what I'd like is to insert an offset plane from this, but at a point up here attached to the tube for the bike seat, right? So I want an offset plane, but I don't know the distance from here to the right plane. So this is a great example where I might use plane point, right? So I choose plane point. I can select the entities to reference. Again, I want to use the right plane and a point in the part. Right, here's a point in the corner, and now what will happen is you'll notice a plane has been inserted parallel to the right plane, but at the point that I've selected. This is very useful if you want to tie your plane to other geometry. In the last example, it was a simple offset, a number, 2 inches, 3 inches, whatever it may be, and that doesn't necessarily reflect well in terms of design intent. If you make a change, you may have to go back and change that as well. So keep that in mind. Plane point allows you to insert a plane parallel with another, right? But attached to model geometry. If this point were to shift, the plane would shift with it, right? It allows you to better reflect your intent. But a very simple command, select a plane or planar face and a point as a reference, and you will get a plane parallel to your reference at that point. Another thing I want to point out about this is notice that by default, the origin or the center of the plane is at that point that you select. Now, as I mentioned before, planes are infinite length, so it's not really a critical thing, but that is where the plane will be visible in the graphics, right in the center of the point that you've selected. So that's a simple example of a plane point. And again, it's just referencing the right plane and any point on your part. Okay, so plane point, real basic example. Let's move on to the next one. The next one I want to get into is a line angle. So jumping out of this, let's get into a line angle. And like the name implies, it allows you to specify an angle between entities, between a line and some other type of reference. So it could be a number of different things, planes, points, axes, but in my case, you want a line and a point, a plane, or an axis. And what it allows you to do is determine a rotation angle. So let's say I want, reference this line, but use the right plane as the reference as well. And what you'll end up with is an angled plane, right? So now you can see here's a plane at a 45-degree angle with respect to the right plane. And so I reference the line. It rotates the plane around that line, referencing the right as its 0-degree position, right? So now I'm getting a plane 45 degrees to the right plane, referencing the line that I clicked on. Okay? And it's just a frequently asked question. How do I insert a plane at 12 degrees or 30 degrees or whatever the scenario may be? And a line angle will often give you that. And again, you can select a line and a plane, a line and a point, a line and an axis. All of those are usable combinations, and you could reference them to construct your plane. And then just enter your value, and you will get a plane at that angle. Okay. So a simple example of a line angle plane. Again, it's not just a plane as a reference, point, axis, a few others as well. Can you change the angle of a plane at that point? And that is a big one, but I would use line angle for it. The only option, the line angle is specifically tailored for the ability to rotate a certain amount of degrees. Okay. Is there a shortcut to hide show origin? I don't believe so. I can double check, but I don't believe so. Okay, so line angle, very simple. Reference a line, another plane or point or axis, and then set your rotation. Set the amount of rotation in the plane that you want to construct. Okay. So that is a line angle. Now, before I get into too many of the various plane options, I do want to mention the pre-select tools. And I mentioned before, you can pre-select the entities you want to reference for your plane before you actually construct it. And this is actually a very fast way of getting it done. Instead of going to the command, choosing the plane type that you want, and then selecting the entities, you can select the entities first. And it's one of the biggest tips that I have for you today. If I select the right plane, for example, and this point, for example, then choose plane, it will automatically know I want a plane point, and it will automatically insert the plane at that point. So it just saves me the step of having to define what type of plane I want first. Just click the entities, click the plane command, and it will default to the selections that you've made. Okay, so a big tip is that pre-selection. Select the entities first, then go to the plane command, and it'll be smart enough to know what type of plane that you're looking for. All right, so that's the pre-selection. Now, we've covered simple offsets, plane, point, and line angle. What I'd like to get into is a point normal plane, and this one's a very flexible command that allows you to insert planes that may be difficult to construct otherwise. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say that, for instance, I want a plane that's normal to this line, but where it passes through this point. And that's a great example where the point normal plane will work. Right? So I can choose point normal, choose the line I want to reference as normal. So I want it normal to this line, perpendicular if you're not familiar with the term normal, and then the point that I want to reference. So I'm selecting a line and a point, and it will give me a plane that's normal to the line, but passes through the point that you select. In fact, the point is the origin of your plane. Okay, so you'll see here at the beginning of the plane, or the center of the plane, I should say. But notice the plane's normal direction is normal to the line that I've selected. And this is a really flexible tool because it allows you to do a lot of stuff that you may have to construct manually otherwise. So just consider, if you need a plane normal to an edge or to a line that passes through a certain point, this is the tool that you'll want to use. Okay, so point normal, very simple. Select an edge, select a line, select a point, and you will get a plane normal to the edge or line through that point. Okay. All right, so that is a simple point normal. Let's move on to the 3-point plane. And this one I have another example I like to show, and that is the squeegee model. And in this case, what I was trying to do is construct guides for a loft. And if you look closely, I have this squeegee, and what I need is, of course, a loft to join the handle to the squeegee itself. But the loft needs to be controlled with guides. And the question comes up, well, how do I create those guides? You'll notice these sketched splines that seem to be out in space. Those are actually constructed using a 3-point plane. All right, so very simple command. You select plane, select 3 points, 3-point, and then just click the 3 points that you want to construct your plane. In my case, I want a plane that's tying the points of my sketch, this point, and the point from another sketch, the rectangle down here. I select all 3 points and I get this plane that goes through all 3 of them. And you can see that plane is what I use to construct the guides that eventually make up the squeegee. So a great example, where you have 3 points that, may be on different parts, different references, and you want to join them together to create one plane, right? So that is the 3-point plane. Like the name implies, you click 3 points and it will insert a plane that's attached to those 3 points. So very simple, but very useful in scenarios where you don't necessarily have a line or a normal direction that you have a reference, but you do have 3 points that will construct that plane. Okay. So that is a 3-point plane. The next one I want to get into is a midplane. So let me select OK to that. We'll jump back into my midplane tab here, and I want to go over how to use a midplane. There's actually 2 very unique ways that you can use this. One of the first is I want a plane right in the middle of a part. And if I look at my planes, there's top, there's front, there's right. None of them are right through the center of the part. And maybe I'm trying to construct a slot down the middle and I want it tied to the middle of the part. It's very important for me to have a plane that's right in the center. This is a great example where midplane really comes into play. I can select plane, I can select midplane, right? Midplane option here, then select 2 planar faces or planes. In this case, I can select this face, and now I have a plane right in the center of those 2 faces. The reason this is important, the reason this is a big deal is if the faces move, the plane will move with it. So you're building, again, that design intent into your model. This plane is referencing 2 other planar faces. And because of that, if those faces shift, I don't have to worry about rebuild issues or so on, right? Yes, you can easily construct this same plane using a distance, an offset, the first plane example I showed you. But remember, an offset is a static number, 1 inch, 2 inch, whatever your units may be. That number drives the plane's distance. If I were to make this part longer, for example, a offset plane would not automatically update. It doesn't know that the part has gotten bigger. If I use a midplane, like in this example, it knows that the part has gotten bigger and it shifts the midplane to accommodate for that. So again, just trying to build a little bit more intent into your model so that it behaves correctly when you go to rebuild. So that is a simple example of a midplane. I select 2 planar faces and I get a plane right in the center of them. Now it's not just 2 parallel faces. Jumping back to my first example here, let's just say I have my 3 default planes, but I want one at 45 degrees with respect to the front and right plane. This is another example where I can use midplane, select the 2 entities, and I get a plane right in between them, right? So perfectly centered between those 2 planes. Now you can flip the alignment. There's an option to flip the alignment there, But this sometimes negates the need to do a line angle plane and set it to 45 degrees. If all I want is the center between two perpendicular faces or two planar faces in general, midplane will accomplish that. So just keep that in mind. There are many situations where if all you're looking for is the center between two planar faces, midplane works as well as a line angle. Okay. All right. So a few questions. Bear with me. I've used point normal planes using splines and a spline curve. For what I was doing is very powerful. Yeah, point normal planes are extremely powerful command. It's one of the more flexible plane commands that are in there. We also have a curve point option, which I'll show you in just a second, which can be very powerful as well. Now on that 45-degree plane, can you also move it forward or backwards to translate? You can also insert an offset from that, and that's an important point. You can construct this plane and then construct another plane off of that as a reference. So it's entirely up to you. You could also construct geometry out where you wanted the offset to be and then drive that as well. Question, can we use variables in an offset plane? Say we want a third of the way through a part, so set a variable, extrude the part using variable, then set the offset. To be honest, I'm pretty sure that will work. I have not tried it personally. I think you can use variables any place you can use dimensions in the Part Studio. I'm not aware of any limitations, but I haven't personally tried it. So I'd have to try it myself to be certain, but I'm fairly confident it would work. Can you make a plane normal to a spline? Yes. In fact, we'll cover it in just a minute. Okay. Moving on. So that is a midplane. Again, it doesn't have to be parallel faces. You can select two opposing, planar faces, and it will insert a plane that bisects them, that goes through the middle, right? So moving on. Can you use a plane as an edge in a sketch? You can construct a plane using an edge in a sketch. Absolutely. I'm going to go over a curve point option, which allows you to construct a plane at the end of an edge, for example. Okay, so that is the mid-plane option inside the plane feature. One of the more common ones. Again, a very powerful one, and I think for many users, you won't need to do a line angle if all you're trying to do is find the center. Right? All right, so that is mid-plane. Now, the last plane type that I want to cover, at least in the standard set of planes, is the curve pointed. It's actually come up a few times now. The question earlier, can I make a plane normal to the end of a curve or normal to the end of a spline? And the answer is yes. You absolutely can. It's what's referred to as a curve point. So the example I like to give with this, and although there are many that could be used, is something like a sweep. And I think commonly you need to insert a plane at the end of your path to define your profile for a sweep. And so imagine, this is my U-bolt, and I need to sketch a circle that's normal to the end of this line, right? This is a perfect example of a curve point. Now, it could be a line, it could be a spline, it could be an edge. All of those things will work for this example. But it's very simple. I don't have any default planes that will work, right? So here's front, top, right. I need a plane that's at the end of that path, but I don't have one. So again, I have to construct it. So let's do that. I select plane. I select, in this case, curve point. Then I select the line and the end point of the line. What that will do is give me a plane normal to the end of the curve. Okay, again, the example I'd like to give is a sweep. I think that's the most common, but you could use this anywhere. It essentially gives you a plane at the end of a curve, or whatever point you select along that curve. And it could be, in this case, it's a line. It could be an edge. It could be a spline. All of those things will work. Select the spline, select the end point of the spline, and you will get a plane at the end, normal to the end. Select a line and end point, and you'll get a plane normal to the end of that line. So again, it's very flexible, and I think this is most commonly used in scenarios like the sweep command, because now I can select my sketch. All right, I've inserted my plane. Again, there's plane 1. To use any of our constructed planes, you use it just like a normal plane. Left-click the plane, hit the sketch command, and now you can start sketching your geometry. All right, I can add a simple circle, do a dimension, and attach my circle to the end of this with something like a Pierce constraint, and now I've attached my profile to my path, right? Again, I don't want to get too into great detail on sweeps. I just think this command kind of lends itself to that. Now I can take the circle, sweep it along the path, and I have a U-bolt shape. Okay. But that's an example where I had to insert a plane because the plane itself needed to be at the end of that path. I needed to use something like a curve point to insert it. And again, it doesn't have to be a line. It could be a spline or an edge or any of those things. So just keep that in mind. If you need to insert a plane normal to the end of something, definitely check out curve point. Okay. Now, there are a number of different plane options out of the box. And I've shown you all of them here today. That's what we have available in Onshape today. Now, Onshape itself evolves very quickly, so you're going to see the list of planes grow. But I want to point out some things that the user community has created that will allow you to add on top of this functionality. All right. So everything I've shown you here today is in standard Onshape. You have this button in your toolbar today. All those planes I just showed you, you can create right now. But there are some features you can add to your toolbar that will give you an even more elaborate set of plane creation tools. So let's go through them. Now, I'm going to jump back to my slide. Just bear with me for a moment here. I want to point out 2 custom feature script features that have been created solely for the purpose of constructing planes. And the reason I bring this up is if you're the type that constructs a lot of planes, these 2 features are definitely worth checking out. They can save you a lot of time, and in some cases, they can construct planes that we just don't have an easy way to do otherwise. So there are 2, multiplane and tangent plane. And both of these, by the way, can be found as feature script samples. All right. So if you haven't added a custom feature to your toolbar, definitely check out the Add Custom Features icon in the far right and the feature script samples filter. There's all kinds of very cool samples that are here. Tangent plane, which we're going to cover in just a second, and multiplane are in this list. There's multiplane. So if you want to add one of these icons to your toolbar, that's all it takes. You can select multiplane, and now you'll see I have an MP button in my toolbar. Now, it's important to point out some of these capabilities will eventually be added to the standard Onshape. But if you wanted a way to automate this, or if you wanted a faster way today, these features are a great way to do that. Now, another thing that I'd like to point out, and this is just a bit of an aside, but on our homepage, under CAD Feature Script, you'll find a list of all the available features. So if you're looking for more detail on some of these features that I'm showing you, in particular the multiplane or the tangent plane, definitely check out our homepage. Under CAD, you'll find Feature Script and a whole lot of very cool examples. Some of them planes, some of them just generic features that have been written by the Onshape community. So definitely check out the Feature Script landing page, all kinds of very cool examples of Feature Script. Now, the example I want to highlight is multiplane and tangent plane. And the question's already come up, can a plane be tangent to a surface? And the answer is yes, with a tangent plane custom feature. So let's walk through this. Now, this is a multiplane example. And the example I like to give is often lofts. If you construct a lot of lofts, they often involve a lot of planes, constructing a lot of planes. Sometimes you'll see a single loft with dozens of planes, and you can imagine inserting them one at a time can be a tedious process. That's where multiplane can really come into play. And it's not just a simple offset. You can create multiple planes around an edge, along a spline, all kinds of cool stuff. So let's do this. Now, in this case, I've added the multiplane tool to my toolbar. So I just click the button in the toolbar, and here's multiplane. Now, multiplane has 2 options, offset or a curve point. We'll start with an offset, and I'll just click the top plane in the graphics. Okay? And I say, okay, I want 2 inches between each plane, and I want 6 planes. And so now I've got 6 planes created all in one command. Okay? Again, I think this applies itself more to the loft command more than anything else, but if you're in any situation where you need to construct a lot of offset planes very easily, I don't have to select plane command 6 times. I just select multiplane, select my reference, and I'm off and running. Now, another option that I like to point out here is you can also set the size of the plane. So if you're the type that likes to see the plane very big or maybe very small, you can set that. And you'll notice I set it to 12, and notice the plane graphics get bigger. Now, keep in mind, again, planes are infinite length, so this is more of a graphical thing, a thing that I prefer to see in the graphics. But if you don't, you don't have to change it. It's not going to have a big impact other than visually in the graphics. So that's a simple offset. The most basic example, but again, multiplane allows you to insert as many as you want in a single shot, in a single command. And like all feature script features, it's listed as a feature in your feature list. So you'll see multiplane 1 here. I can right click and edit and change the number of planes if I decide to. So again, it behaves just like a plane command or any other feature for that matter in Onshape. So that is a simple multiplane referencing a top face. You can select any planar face as a reference as well, right? And insert as many planes, given any distance that you'd like. So that's a simple offset. Now, the multiplane has also got a curve point option, and this allows you to select an edge or a spline or even a line or a curve, really anything, and add as many planes as you want along that geometry. So here's an example. I've got this convoluted edge that I really want to maybe sweep a profile or loft a profile around this thing. And so I select my edge, right? You'll notice by default it has 2 planes at the start or the 2 midpoints of this geometry, but I can add as many as I want. So let's say I want 8 planes. And what we'll do is it splits up the edge evenly and adds 8 planes along that edge. Okay? So here I'm constructing 8 planes along an edge with a single command. And notice that the planes themselves are normal to the curvature, which is what most users will want if they're constructing something like a loft. I want to be able to, insert planes normal to a curve very quickly. Okay. All right. So a few questions that have come up. Can you still drag them to resize, or are they set the size in the feature? And this is a very good question. I mentioned before, all planes can be resized. If you left click a plane, you'll see these little arrows or these little circles in the corners where you can grab the arrow and drag it. And that will allow you to dynamically resize the plane. Okay, so if you're the type that likes to see the plane a certain size, you can grab and drag it and resize it to whatever size you'd like. Okay. Question, can you copy a sketch from one plane to the next in the multiplanes? The answer is yes. You can right-click any sketch and you'll see an option to copy it. Okay, so just keep in mind, you can right-click a sketch, say copy the sketch, and then right-click a plane, and you can paste the sketch onto that plane. Okay. Again, very useful, I think, for loft command. If you're trying to paste similar profiles to construct a loft, right-click the sketch, copy, right-click, paste on whatever plane you want. Okay. All right, so moving on. If you have a sketch on a plane, does it carry the sketch with it on copies? If you have a sketch on the plane, does it carry? If you copy the sketch, it will carry the entities over, but it does not link the two. If I do a copy and paste, they're not dynamically linked. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding that question. Can the force the plane to be normal to some other reference other than the spline? Not in this command. This command is automatically normal to the edge that you're selecting, the curve that you're selecting by default. I do want to point out, though, at least with this command and the next one, that the source code is publicly available. So if you're feeling ambitious and you want to take this and build a variation of it, this is the source code that makes up that multiplane feature. You can take it and construct your own version. You could select another face as a reference and use it. This plane does not do that. But you could easily adapt this code to make it do that. So I do want to point out these features are open source. You can take them, copy them, and build your own versions of them. Okay? Is tangent plane generation possible? Yes, that's in fact our next example. So bear with me for just a moment. Now, I mentioned edges. Tangent plane is a great, multiplane is a great example where you can add a whole bunch of planes normal to a curve like this. But I also want to point out an option that's in this command, and that is the option for points. By default, it adds a point where the plane intersects the edge. And I think for a lot of users, they want that point because it allows me to reference or tie my sketch to the actual edge. By default, it does create those points, but if you don't care for them, you can check hide points, and it will get rid of the point in that plane. So just keep in mind, by default, it will add a point. I think it's very valuable because you want to be able to attach your sketch geometry to the edge that you're referencing, but you can remove that. You can remove those points. Okay. All right, so a few questions. Can you reposition one of the multiplane along the spline? No. As of today, it takes the distance of the edge and evenly spaces it out, and then allows you to define how many planes you want along that given edge. Now, we could, of course, discuss workarounds where I split the edge into pieces, and we could discuss those things, of course, but this command doesn't have a option or setting to move one within the set. You could, of course, insert a whole bunch of them and insert one by itself. We could discuss workarounds, but this command doesn't have that, at least out of the box. Okay. Now, this is the curve point option, but it works in more than just edges. For example, here's a multiplane, and I have a curve. This is actually a helix, by the way. And I select curve point, I select my curve, and let's say I want 6 planes along that helix. Okay. So here I have 6 planes normal to the curve, evenly spaced along the helix. Okay. So that's another example of curve point, and it doesn't have to be 3D geometry. It could be something as simple as a line. I want, here's a line. I want, given this distance, I want 5 planes along that. And it takes it, breaks it up into evenly spaced instances, and again, gives you those planes. The neat thing about that, of course, is that it's tied to the line. If the line gets bigger, the planes change in distance. So very neat command. And again, it doesn't have to be complex edges or helixes. It could be something as simple as a line. Okay? Or it could be something as simple as a curve. Right? A simple 2D series of arcs or spline. Here's a spline example, for instance. Okay? So just keep that in mind. As you're going through this is one of the more robust commands that we have for generating planes, and especially if you're doing those complex shapes, complex lofts or any kind of those types of shapes where, it's not as simple as just constructing a few planes. You may need multiple planes at once. Okay. Question: if I delete the line, do the planes disappear? And the answer to that is yes, they're dependent on it. The edge, for example, that generates these planes in this example needs to be there. Much like, if I were to select the edge and fillet it. Well, if I delete the edge, then the fillet obviously has an issue. It was dependent on that edge. The same thing goes, by the way, for planes. Okay, so if you were to delete the line, if you were to delete the curve of the edge, the planes would go with it because they are dependent on it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's another big reason that I say, if you can use one of the default planes, the front, top, or right, use it. It will never change. You never have to worry about those planes disappearing because of model changes. So just keep that in mind. Now, that is the multiplane command. Definitely one of the most powerful, plane features that we have, and worth checking out, especially if you're doing, crazy loft contours or anything along those lines where, inserting planes manually one at a time can be tedious. So that is a multiplane. Now, the next feature that I want to show you, the last feature that I have for you here today, is the tangent plane. And this is one that often comes up. How do I make a plane tangent to a cylinder, for example? Or how do I make a plane, tangent to even a complex surface? So this is an example. We'll add another custom feature here. Let's add the tangent plane feature to my toolbar. So I'll select tangent plane. And now I have the tangent plane button in my toolbar. I'll select tangent plane, and we'll start with a simple cylinder. All right, so I'll select the cylinder, the cylindrical face, and then some kind of a reference. I can select, let's say, the right plane, for example. And what it will do is it will give me a plane that's normal to that surface, you'll see here, but tangent to the thing that I clicked on. Right? So let's do this cylinder here. Okay. Notice I'm now inserting a plane, let me rotate it around a bit, that's tangent to the cylinder that I clicked on and perpendicular to the right plane that I selected. Right? And it could be anything. I could say, okay, not the right plane. Let's do this face and show me the plane that's closest, still tangent to this surface, but closest to this point. And you'll see it inserts a plane tangent to the surface, but closest to the point that I selected. Right? And you can use this in a number of different examples. So here's another example of this. Let's select this sphere. Right? Let's select the sphere here and the point here. And now I have a plane that's tangent to the sphere, and closest to this point that I've selected. So basically any cylindrical face, conical face, spherical face, you click on it, even non-planar faces, and then you select some other reference, whether that's a plane, a point, something along those lines, and it will insert a plane tangent to the surface you've clicked on, but referencing the other entity that you've selected. Okay, so definitely check out tangent plane. All of these examples work very well. You can reference a simple cylinder, a conical face, a sphere, even a non-planar surface like the one I was showing you just a moment ago. Okay, so that is tangent plane. Again, many of these features, the things that you're seeing in custom features today, like these two examples, will I'm sure inevitably be added to standard Onshape, but today you can accomplish them by adding them as a feature to your toolbar. Okay. All right, so I see a few questions that have come up, so give me a moment here. Question. Can I turn the line into a construction line? Yes, these can reference construction lines, and that's an easy way to convert it to construction geometry so it's ignored in the feature, but still usable when you go to generate the feature itself. Okay. What will happen if I delete one of the planes along that line? The thing to keep in mind about all of these commands is that they are tied to the feature. If you delete the feature, you're deleting all of the instances in the multiplane example. Now, you can't go in and say, I want to delete one instance within the 5 in the multiplane example I was showing you a moment ago. So it doesn't have that level of control. You either delete the whole feature or add the whole feature, but you can't specify, I want only 4 out of 5 instances. I'm going to manually delete that. And that may be something we add in the future. These, again, were all open source features. They're written by the Onshape community, but these are things that you will eventually see in Onshape itself. All right, question. Will the plane distance automatically change when I change the line size? And the answer is yes. And that's one of the benefits of using a line as a reference. It will reflect your intent. If you change the line, the planes will automatically space out to accommodate for that change in distance. What if you want the plane on the other side of the cylinder? Then you want to select another reference. I selected the right plane. You could select the front plane as a reference. That would give you something 90 degrees to that. You could have a point as a reference. So I could select a cylindrical face and a point, and I would get a plane that's attached to that point and then tangent to the cylinder. So there's more than just the right plane. You can use other planes, other faces, other points. You can reference a lot of things with this tangent plane. Will these experimental features ever be removed from Onshape? It's important to point out that I would say no to removing the feature in general, but even if you add a feature like this to your toolbar, and then let's say that feature got deleted from the original source, it doesn't affect your model at all. So don't worry about adding a feature and then worrying about it changing later or being deleted later. It's inserted into your document and will never change from that point forward. All right. So if you delete it and reinsert it, of course, you may have a different issue, but it will never affect how it rebuilds, and it will never just simply be deleted because of changes to the original. Okay. So again, don't be afraid of trying out these custom features. They can't break your design because of a change from someone else. They're stable in that sense. Okay. If I use the tangent point feature, how can I go back to later to see what point I had used? Remember, any of these planes can be edited. So if I edit a plane, I can right-click and edit, and I can see the point that I was referencing. I can even change the point that I was referencing for this plane. Okay, so just keep that in mind. You can always edit the multiplane, the tangent plane, or even the standard planes. All these planes we constructed. I can right-click and edit and change those at any time. They're just a feature in my feature list. Okay. All right, question. If I draw a sketch on a plane and realize it was not made on a good plane, how do I change this sketch plane? And this is a very good question. Let me jump into, I don't know that I have a great example of this, but I will show it. So let's say that I edit a sketch and I decide, I constructed this on the front plane, but I realize that's wrong. I can delete the front plane as a reference and then click another plane. Let's say the right plane. Right? And now this sketch sits on the right plane instead of the front plane. It's just a matter of hitting the X next to the plane in the sketch dialog and choosing whatever reference that you want. Right? So you can change the sketch plane at any point by just clicking the X, getting rid of it, and selecting the correct reference that you're looking for. Okay? All right. So that really is what I had planned for you. We are ending a few minutes early, so I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. Real quickly, one last thing. If you're interested in giving us feedback or trying Onshape in your professional environment, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know what you think. We really encourage you to use the feedback tool in Onshape itself under the help menu. You have this option for feedback. We really encourage you to give us any feedback that you have. What commands do you see that we need? What commands would you like to see improved? What bugs have you run into? Those kinds of things. We really appreciate any feedback that you can give us. Okay. So again, if you're trying Onshape in your professional environment, you're running into an issue, let us know. Give us your feedback. Use that feedback tool under the help menu, and we'd love to help you out. All right, so that's what I had planned. I know there are a few questions out there, so just bear with me. I will stick around and answer them, so stick around for just a few minutes. But I want to say thank you, everyone, and have a good day.